Hey guys, English is a strong and different opening. There is less theory than in our popular variations. Your opponent doesn't see it as often as other lines, like for example King's Pawn, which means he's not as used or as well prepared to play against it. Here you're gonna learn how to play English opening. We'll see basic ideas, middle game plans, masters games using those ideas we mentioned, and live games where I played English and explained some key concepts about this opening. After watching this video, you'll be able to play and win with English opening. We have English opening on the board after 1 c4. The idea with this move is that we are controlling the center, specifically the square d5, but this time there is something different. We are using a bishop pawn, which means if at some point there is a trade, we'll be trading a side pawn for an enemy central pawn. So we keep our two central pawns, as black will have only one. Black can develop pieces basically as they want. So I'll show you this scheme I really like. This is going to work really well against most of the alternatives black can try. So in this scheme, after c4, we want to develop the knight over c3. The kingside bishop is going to be developed over the fianchetto, so we will play g3 and bishop g2. And this knight is going to be really well on e2, so we want to play e3 and knight there. Of course, we want to castle later, and one of the main ideas in this scheme is that we want to play on the queen side. We're going to understand this much better if we see some moves, for both sides. So let's play one of the main systems black can try against English, and it is a system with a King's Indian defense against English. So they can try, for example, knight f6, d6, g6, develop the bishop. Sometimes they play e5. So we are going to use this scheme against one of the most popular ways of development black can try against English. So let's see. We want to play knight c3 here. They could be playing g6 and g3. Bishop g7. We said bishop goes to g2. One of the keys in English opening is the control of the square d5. Observe, from move number 1, we are playing c4, controlling that square. So in many lines, the control of this square is going to be a key concept, and probably we want to use it at some point in the middle game for our knight. Also observe that we are targeting there with some pieces. Also, even the knight, when we develop this knight over e2, that's one of the main ideas, that the knight on e2 is going to be connected to d5, because we could be playing knight f4 or knight c3 in some lines. But also the knight on e2 is going to is not going to be blocking the bishop as it is on f3, so we keep a very nice control of that square. Well, let's say black castles and we play e3 here, as we were saying. Black can play d6. This is the King's Indian system we were saying, and as we mentioned, knight g e2. Black could try e5. That's a very common move in English. I have seen it in many games. We castle, let's say something like knight c6, and here something normal like d3. This is a move we need to play to defend this pawn, but also the bishop could be developed at some point over d2. Usually we don't have like a rush with this bishop. Observe, this bishop is not going to be blocking the rook on a1, because this rook is actually going to b1 and we are pushing over b. So the bishop is not like a big problem here on c1. Of course, we can develop it later. Maybe over this diagonal is going to be fine. In some positions we can use the fianchetto, but well, that's like a different plan. In general, if we attack on the queen side, we delay a little a move like this because we could be blocking the rook. So the main idea is that we don't need to rush that much with the bishop, because the rook is going to be fine here on b1. So a normal move here is bishop a6, and here observe black has a very nice control of d5, like 3 pieces, so they could be pushing over there. We want to avoid that move, so in this position we are going to play knight d5. Let's say black plays here queen d7. That's one of the best moves in this position, and then we are going to connect the two knights. We are going to play knight e, c3. One more time, observe. something we were saying about the square d5 in English opening. And this is a tricky position. Here black can try bishop a3, trying to get rid of our fianchetto's bishop. And here we can try this nice idea: knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and knight d5. And the idea is that we are attacking the bishop and we are attacking c7 at the same time. So in this position, black needs to play the move bishop d8. That's the only move for black, defending that pawn on c7. But as you can see, that position is a little unnatural for that bishop. It's blocking the two rooks. It's not covering the fianchetto. So in general, we could say white is slightly better here. But let me show you what can happen if the bishop goes here. Now the queen is overloaded, defending a3, defending c7. So we can get one pawn for free. We trade and we capture. And this is a good position for white. We have a pawn up, so we have a clear advantage here. There is a common mistake we need to avoid. Observe, in this position I said knight takes knight, and this is a move we shouldn't forget. I have seen some people blundering here. They see the queen overloaded and they say, well, I can just take the pawn for free here. So I trade and I capture, but this is actually a mistake because the knight is still on f6. So in this position, black can play knight g4, and then there's no way to defend h2. This is winning for black. So be careful with that, with the order of the moves in a position like this. So we trade first, and then we play knight d5, and then we are trading if we want and if we can capture that pawn on c7. So that's a tricky and interesting line if black plays bishop a3. But also, let me show you the main idea or the main plan for these positions. So let's assume normal moves for black, like rook f e8, for example, and then we want to play here rook b1, and we want to push over here over the queen side. The idea is that once the knight is not there, the bishop will put a lot of pressure on the diagonal. There are some ideas with the capture on b7. Also, in some positions, the bishop can go over a3, the queen can go over a4. Also, we can use this pawn to create even more weaknesses over this diagonal in some lines. So the idea is that we have some ways to increase the pressure on the queen side. Let's say rook a d8, we play b4 here. Also, the knight on d5 is helping us because it's controlling the board from the center. And that's the plan for this popular scam. So as I mentioned, this scam we played here is going to work pretty well if black plays a King's Indian system, but also against most of the developments black can try. This is going to be a really nice weapon, playing and taking some space on the queen side, but also controlling the center and specifically d5. But we cannot make a video about how to play English opening and not talk about the symmetrical variation. So let's see how can we play against this line. So let's say c4 and black plays c5, and this is one of the most common replies you're gonna see when you play English. But here we have many ways to develop pieces. I'm just gonna show you some ideas. Usually we play here knight c3. This is going to be very well. And let's say black develops the knight over c6. Something we can do is the same scam we saw against the King's Indian system, like g3, bishop g2, and knight e2. And this is going to work pretty well. We can still castle king side. We can still play rook b1 and play on the queen side. So that is going to be perfect here. But also you can do other things. For example, you can develop the bishop over the fianchetto and not play on the queen side. Instead, you can play a little in the center or on the king side with moves like f4. So let me show you what can happen. Let's say a move like g3 and bishop g2, like e3 and knight e2. So let's say they castle, we castle, and this is a common position for this kind of lines. As I was saying, instead of playing on the queen side with a3, rook b1 and b4, we can play our ideas like, for example, b3 and develop the bishop over the fianchetto. That's a plan here. And we can try some break over f4 later, so our rook is going to be better, and also our bishop a little better over there. That's a really interesting way to play against symmetrical variation. There are more options. For example, instead of developing the bishop over the fianchetto, there is this idea where we play knight f3 and then we play in the center. So we can try e3. The bishop will be developed somewhere over here later instead of the great diagonal, and we're gonna play d4. That's a another really good way to play here because we are controlling the center and we have a very natural development here. But also I want to share with you this idea I saw in a Karpov's game some time ago, and I found it really interesting, and I even used it in some tournament. So it is this move b3 here, and let's say black plays knight f6, that's a very common replay, then we can play bishop b2 here. Usually black is going to try g6 to develop the bishop over there and face our bishop and reduce the activity of our bishop, and the idea is that at this point Karpov played bishop takes f6. After pawn takes bishop, here you might be thinking, well, but I mean, what is he doing? He just lost the bishop from the great diagonal. It was a really good bishop. How does this make sense? Well, the idea is that after this trade, d5 is going to be a weakness because the pawn is not going to be able to control d5 anymore. Also, there are some problems, some small problems with the pawn structure over there. So he's going to base his middle game strategy on the control of the square d5 because this is going to be an outpost, really nice for his knights. So Karpov continued knight c3, bishop g7, g3 because this bishop is going to be essential from g2 controlling the great diagonal, but also d5. Knight c6 was played, bishop g2, f5 improving that bishop, also controlling the center, but then e3. Black can castle, and then knight g, e2. Observe one more time, we are not blocking the bishop with the knight on f3. I want to say that this is not really run. I mean, in many English opening variations, the knight is developed over here, but I think it's really interesting, it's really simple when we play the knight over e2 and we connect the two knights and we keep the bishop open over there. So that's why I really like this kind of positions. Also, the knight on f3 is exposed in many lines because there is a pawn on e5 going to e4. So the knight over e2 one more time. Some moves later, they got this position, they traded queens, and Karpov played here d4. He's going to continue advancing in the center, opening the file and putting even more pressure, but observe the knight on d5 is a key piece in this position. Black played rook f d8, more pressure for the d file, c takes d4, this is exactly what we needed, e takes d4, and king f8. In this position there is this move c5. So now the advantage Karpov had, which was the knight in the outpost, is going to be changing a little, and now what he's gonna get is a passed pawn on the queen side. Something we need to understand about this position is that white has a pawn majority on the queen side, and they can create, and indeed they are creating, a passed pawn on the queen side, as black has a pawn majority on the king side, but they cannot do the same because they have doubled pawns here. So the pawn majority for black is useless here, and white can play this endgame as if they had a pawn up, and that's exactly what Karpov is going to do. Karpov is a master in this kind of positions. After some moves they got here, and we continue with the same plan, a very nice pawn majority on the queen side. We're gonna get a passed pawn over there at some point, as black continues with the useless pawn majority on the king side. And well, finally they got in this position, and this continued with king c4, knight g6 attacking both pawns, but then knight g2 is defending everything on the king side, king d6, but well, it's just too late. King b5 is going to be getting that pawn on the a file, king d5, king takes pawn, king e4, b4, king f3, but Karpov is going to sacrifice the knight because he saw he's already winning over the queen side. After king takes knight, b6, knight goes to f8 to try to stop the pawn, but remember we have an a pawn over there, so we can play here king b5, knight goes to d7, and then a4. After knight takes pawn, king takes knight, and king f3, but we are winning with the a pawn. Black will try to get some compensation with the bishop pawn, but it's not really going to happen here. After a7, f4, we promote to queen and f3. There is this check, queen e8, and the idea is that we're gonna get probably both pawns, and then we can sacrifice the queen for the bishop pawn and promote the rook pawn. That's why at this point black resigned in this game. Another common scam black can try against English is 4 knights. So let's say e5, we play knight c3, and then they can play knight f6. And here there are some ideas with d5. So this is probably a good moment to play knight f3, attacking the pawn on e5, developing, getting the tempo, and then black usually plays knight c6, and that's why we call this 4 knights. In this position we have some options. I really like this line with e4 just to make sure black is not playing d5, and after this e4 black has some options like bishop c5 or bishop b4 are the two best moves here. After bishop b4 we are going to continue with a common development, normal development. There's a threat here, bishop takes knight, knight takes pawn, so we should play d3 here. And in the next moves we are playing bishop e2, we are castling, the bishop is probably going to e3, maybe we want to play a3 to make sure the knight is not creating problems for our bishop. On e3, sometimes we play a3 just to create some problems for the other bishop. So that's a very normal position. White is more or less equal. At some point they could be slightly better in these positions. But also I want to say that actually the most common reply in this position, especially in among beginners, intermediate or club players, the most common reply is going to be bishop c5, and this is actually the line we really want to get into. It's not a mistake, but it's very dynamic and very interesting. In this position we can play knight takes pawn, and the idea is that after knight takes knight, which is the best move for black, one more time this move is very tempting but it's a mistake. It looks like our king is going to be in a bad position because we cannot castle, but actually there is nothing wrong with this. White is winning this game. We just play d4, observe how we're controlling the center. There might be a check here, but it's a little surprising the fact that there's no problem here for white. In the next move we are playing h3, and then I will have to go back. We're developing the bishop over d3, we're developing the other bishop over g5 pinning. Sometimes we can also trade it for that knight when it goes to a6. Also we are threatening e5. Observe, this knight is protecting the other knight. And the king is going to h2, where it's going to be totally safe. Observe, black does not have a dark squares bishop. And our rook is going to f1, where there is a half open file, and it's going to be really powerful there. Connected to the bishop on g5 can create many problems. Later in this video we're gonna see a game where I played this line. So instead of bishop takes f2, the right move for black in this position is knight takes e5. Then we should play d4, getting the piece back with the fork, and black should try bishop b4. That's the right move here, so they keep the bishop on the board. Pawn takes knight, knight takes e4. In this position there's a threat on c3. We can play either queen d4 or queen f3. Both moves are fine. Sometimes knight takes knight is played, pawn takes bishop e7, and this position is more or less equal. There are some ideas, for example, with queen g4. This is annoying because if they play g6 they are weakening the king side. If they move the king they cannot castle. So in general it's an interesting middle game here, very playable for white. But also if you don't want to play e4 here, you can try g3 as we have seen in other lines, and this is going to work pretty well. There is this game where Garry Kasparov played against Ivanchuk. Ivanchuk played here bishop b4, and then bishop g2 was played, black castled and white castled. A common reply here is e4. This is very theoretical. And then Kasparov played knight g5. There is a trade because this knight is putting so much pressure there. And b takes e3 is a very normal reply. Rook e8, and we are gonna use this pawn to open the line, I mean the file, but also to open the diagonal. So we can play f3 here. At the same time we get rid of that powerful pawn in the center. E takes f3, and the knight comes back to f3. In this game Ivanchuk played d5, and Kasparov found a really nice move. He played here d4. He ignored the threat on the pawn on c4. We all know Kasparov, he's a very aggressive player. He loved this kind of situations where he has one pawn down but initiative and compensation. In the game, Ivanchuk played knight e4, but let me show you, if he accepts the pawn on c4, there is bishop g5, and there is a lot of pressure here on the pin. Observe, remember the rook, and we're moving the knight, sometimes to e5. Also, the bishop is going to be much better. So I think the compensation is more or less clear here, and Kasparov is in the ground his best. So after this d4, Ivanchuk just played knight e4. He didn't accept the challenge. He just said, okay, I'm going to improve the knight. This square is just great for my knight. I'm attacking that pawn. And Kasparov said, well, I need to defend that pawn with queen c2, but also looking at the knight in the center. Now he said, well, I don't believe this is a story. I just take the pawn on c4, and white found here rook b1. This is a very subtle move, because we are preventing black from developing the bishop, as we are getting the pawn on b7. And getting the pawn on b7 is not only one pawn, it's many weaknesses on the pawn structure, but also a lot of pressure on the diagonal. So Ivanchuk played here f5, and in this position Kasparov played one of my favorite moves in this game. I'm going to show you the move, and maybe you want to try to understand it, and it is this g4. And I really like this move because, okay, we're undermining the base of the knight, that's clear, but I mean, the knight is protected by the rook, so how is this a good move? If the knight is still very well protected, if you're just weakening your king, how do we play a move like g4? How is g4 a strong move in this position? And even more, how did Kasparov find this move in this position? Well, let's try to understand what can happen here. If black takes the pawn on g4, there is this move knight e5, and this is very strong because the bishop is better, the rook is better, and also the knight is better. So maybe black can try this, but then we capture here, and then we are still attacking the knight, and we're getting a7. So this position is much better for white. Black can try knight g6, but we take and we take, and white is really well. That's why g4 is actually a strong move here. Well, in the game Ivanchuk played queen e7. He said, I don't want problems, I just want to keep my knight safe there in the center. And then g takes f5. The knight goes back to d6, covering b7, also attacking f5, and then this move knight g5. Queen takes pawn, but there are many problems over the diagonal. So bishop d5 is very strong. The king goes to h8, and then we trade queens. The problem is that after bishop f4, all white pieces are making sense in this position, as black pieces are, some of them undeveloped, the other ones are disconnected, so they are not really doing a good team work. Also, there are some problems in the back rank. We're gonna see that very soon. In this position, black played knight d8, trying to cover a little this square f7, because there are some ideas with bishop takes knight. For example, if black takes the pawn on f5, we can play bishop takes knight. Then the bishop is hanging. Even if they capture here, they are going to be lost after check. Check, interfering the back rank, and rook f8, checkmate. So that's why in this position, after bishop f4, black just played here knight d8, but then bishop takes knight is very strong, because this knight is a key defender. This knight is covering b7, is covering e8, and is covering f7. So once this knight is not there after rook e1, black is totally lost. Observe the rook is not really helping black this time. After rook takes, bishop d7 is covering e8, but it's not covering e7, so we can get the 7th rank, also an essential rank. And after bishop c6, if you want, you can pause the video and try to find the last move of this game where Ivanchuk resigned. I will explain it and will say it right now. In this position, Kasparov found this surprising and strong move f6. And the idea is that he's threatening checkmate here with f takes g7, But if black takes the pawn, there is rook takes h7, also checkmate. But even more, if black takes the bishop hanging on d5, then we have check, only move bishop g8, and then look at this move, f7. We are threatening mate over here, but even if they take, it's still going to be checkmate, a smothered mate in this position. That's why after f6, Ivanchuk resigned here. And the last system we need to understand to be in a really good shape to play English opening is when black plays this Mikhenas scam. So let's say c4, knight f6, knight c3, and then e6. The idea is that they want to play d5 here very soon. I didn't mention earlier that we can transpose to queen's pawn anytime we want. So if you're a good queen's pawn player, you can do that. For example, you can play d4 here, and you're going to be playing maybe Ninso Indian after bishop b4, or Queen's Gambit. Queen's Gambit after d5. That's something we can do, but we don't have to do that if you don't want. We can also play e4 here, and we are still in English ground. In this position, black can still try d5, but we can play here e5. Usually, the main line is going to be d4, that's what they usually play. And here we capture the knight, they capture the knight, and we capture c3, and they capture f6. That's the way this line, this Mikhenas system continues. Here we are gonna develop pieces like knight f3, pawn to d4, bishop to d3, and also want to show you a nice trick here. For example, let's say we play here knight f3. The best alternatives for black here are going to be e5 or c5, but we're going to continue with our ideas. As I said before, we develop the bishop probably to d3, we castle, and that's a very comfortable position in general. But also, not always they will find e5 or c5. That's not so easy to play. More common are maybe here moves like knight c6, and then we can play d4. Let's say they play something like bishop d6, we play bishop d3, and there's a trick here. If black continues with a nomad development, we can play the move bishop g5, and the queen is trapped here in this position, so we get a really big advantage. Even when English is considered a strong and solid opening, we can also play aggressive chess in this line. There is this master's game where something really interesting happened. Zvyagintsov is playing as white and Goganov as black. c4 was played, knight f6, knight c3, and e6, knight f3, bishop b4, and in this position there is a move I really enjoyed, and that's the reason why we are analyzing this game. Here Zvyagintsov played g4, and of course this is very aggressive. He wants to play g5 and misplace that knight, but let's see, if the knight takes the pawn, we can play here rook g1. Even if black can defend, we can play a3, and when the knight goes back, we can take the pawn on g7. This position, of course, is clearly better, or a little better, for white. So after g4, Goganov played d6, and as you can imagine, g5. The knight goes now to the square they cleared, knight f d7, and then h4. We continue with the advance on the king side, c5, and queen c2, knight c6, and b3 just to develop the bishop over the fianchetto and put pressure on the king side. Knight from d to e5, we can trade, d takes, e5 was played, and there are some ideas over here now that the knight is not on f3, so we need to play e3 here. Black can play h6, some threats because there is a pin. We don't want to capture because then there will be an isolated pawn here on h4, so probably we're going to lose that pawn. So Zvyagintsov played rook g1, h takes, bishop takes c3, queen takes c3. The rook goes to h5, putting pressure on this pawn, but then f4 is defending the pawn. E takes f4 is probably a little dubious in this game, because now white can play queen takes e7, and this queen is going to create some problems, especially connected to the bishop over the dark squares. F takes e3, d takes e3, and then knight b4, and this is probably the final mistake in this game. in this position black is actually lost. Probably they saw knight c2 and they thought they had something, but it's interesting how black pieces are not really connected this time. The queen cannot really get involved in the attack. After bishop b2, knight c2 was played, but observe king e2 is covering this square, so the queen cannot really join the attack. So rook h2 is not a problem for white. We can just play bishop g2 here, and this position is totally lost because we do have checks, we do have ideas with bishop here, and we do have ideas with rook d1, so our threats are much more serious than black's ideas here. So queen e7, bishop f6, and in this position black resigned. The problem is that after something like queen f8, for example, we can just trade queens and go to the open file, and there's no clear way to stop rook d8, maybe sacrificing material or something, but of course this is decisive advantage for white. So I just want to highlight one more time the move Zagintsev played here, so you can see that we can also be aggressive when we play English opening, and it was this move g4 in move number 4. Okay, so 3 minutes 2 seconds, and this opponent, he seems to be a good player. Let's see what happens. So he's playing e5, I'm playing knight c3, and probably we're getting into a 4 knights in English if he plays knight c6. Okay, so this is the line we already studied in the video. e4, here he can play bishop c5, very tempting, but also bishop b4 is a really good option. Okay, a6, that's like making a pause, like wasting a tempo here. So how do we take advantage of this? Well, I think I'm just going to develop, like bishop e2 should be a good move because that's the square where we're going to develop the bishop either way. So here again, bishop b4 or bishop c5 should be the right moves. Okay, bishop c5, let's see, knight takes pawn is still fine, right? This is still a good idea. Yeah, this is still working. Bishop takes pawn is not a big deal, and yeah, knight takes knight should be the right move this time. Well, bishop takes pawn, we said we could capture, and then we said we could play d4. This time he doesn't even have the check, so this has to be a good position for white. I can play bishop g5, but he can play h6, so I don't think this is the right moment. So by now I'm just going to play rook f1, improving my rook, also improving my king. I'm just canceling working with the king, to say it in some way. And now this is a threat, bishop g5. Well, he didn't defend against that, so I'm just playing bishop g5, and then I'm taking, and then this is a problem for white, I mean for black. Now I can play knight d5. I don't see how he's defending his king side here. Probably he needs to play f5, but well, I take, and then I'm threatening the knight. So yeah, this position is a decisive advantage for white here. Of course, this is a blitz game and we still need to win, but we could say we got a good position out of the opening. Well, king h8, now what? Should we capture here? Should we put pressure here with queen d2? That's an option. What do we play? Well, this is very tempting. I mean, I'm getting a tempo, I'm improving my queen, I'm connecting my rooks. So I don't see why not queen d2. He should play king g7 here, and then I'm planning to capture f6 with the knight. Well, he resigned, probably too early, but we need to say that this position is totally lost here for black. Okay, so English opening c4, and let's see which scam our opponent is playing. Okay, so he's playing f5, then the knight c3, and then knight f6. So he's just playing some kind of dodge. He's just ignoring a little our English. So we can just continue with our scam with g3, bishop g2, the knight over e2 should be fine. And then we castle and we continue our plan. Okay, so e5, and well, d3 should be a normal move in these positions. And we're going to continue with our ideas on the queen side. He's playing c6, but he's not threatening d5 by now, so we don't have to worry about that. But maybe later we will have to think about that threat. I mean, he can still, yeah, he can still play d5, but I would have a lot of pressure with queen b3, and I mean after the trade, queen b3, yeah, that should be a really good position for white. Okay, so bishop a6, and then what? Well, I'm going to play something I don't like to do, but putting the queen on the same line as the bishop, that's not so good. But my idea is to prevent this d5. Okay, b5. Oh, I can take the pawn, right? There's a pin over here, so we can just capture that pawn for free. That should be a mistake from him. And well, d5 is again a move here. That's probably what he should play. So d5, I'm just going back. Well, e4 instead. Now he's threatening my knight because he blocked the diagonal. So now what? I'm looking at knight f4 or d4. That should be a good move. Yeah, let's try knight f4 and see what happens. If he goes back to d7 and getting the pawn on d6, okay, he goes back to f7. So probably I'm going back to d4. Now I have some ideas with knight e6. Yeah, this should be fine. He should defend queen e7, I guess. And then probably I would develop my bishop just to finish my development, because we're already playing the middle game and my bishop is still there. So yeah, queen e7, bishop here is what I'm planning in this position. 3 minutes, no increment. So I need to play a little fast. Also queen d7 is a move, so he keeps the pawn protected and he can develop the knight on at least over a6. Okay, well a5. Well, I'm getting the exchange here, right? This should be good for me. I mean, bishop b2 is a move we already said we needed to play. And now we have the exchange up, also like one pawn up. So this position is already very good for white. Well, okay, let's play rook d1. If he opens that file, I would have some nice pressure over there. I have a passed pawn here. Okay, rook b8. Let's say rook b1. My rook is not so great here. It's on the same line as the bishop, so okay, knight a4. I'm going to trade some pieces. Yeah, definitely I want to trade some pieces here because I don't have too much time to think, and also this pawn on d6 is weak. I think I can get it after the trades, so yeah, that's why I'm trading. Even when I lost my bishop, that's something I was trying to avoid. I thought this was a good moment to trade because of the extra pawns I can get with all those trades. And now that that pawn is not on c6, d5 is going to be a great square for my knight or my bishop. So yeah, the decisive advantage, as I said, but we still need to play the right moves under time pressure. Yeah, bishop d5 is good. This bishop is a good defender for the king, so once that bishop is gone, the king will be in trouble there. Okay, knight e4. I think we capture the bishop better, right? And then we give some check, queen and knight, creating threats on this king. I don't think the king can escape. I mean, king g7 is still fine, but I will play queen e6, threatening this pawn, also threatening knight h5. So queen e6, and also we are winning on time. So yeah, this is a win. Okay, queen b2, some threats over here, but we said we can give a check. Well, we need to be careful with this threat, right? I can always capture this pawn and defend and attack. So yeah. Yeah, knight h5 is winning. Now I can capture the pawn and get the knight. So this is winning. Okay, queen e2, and now what? Well, I have some options. For example, I can take this pawn, and now I can play rook d5, or rook e6 was good. Okay, If you guys have any question, let me know in the comments. If you wanna see the 5 best chest opening traps, they work almost always. Check out this interesting video, I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you guys, like, subscribe, see you on the next.